Good evening. This is the KPFK local news break of the Pacifica Evening News on 90.7 FM Los Angeles, 98.7 Santa Barbara, 93.7 San Diego, and 99.5 Ridgecrest, China Lake. This 15-minute segment of all Southern California news airs each weeknight during the 6 o'clock hour. It's Thursday, September 3rd. I'm Dan Fritz.
Hello, this is Peter Mathews, and I'm here in the time slot of the Lawyers Guild. The Lawyers Guild and Jim Rafferty will be back next week. And we're here to talk today to a couple of guests and also open up the phone lines to the public for about half an hour so you can give us input on what's going on right now in your lives and the world, and particularly the gap between rich and poor. The name of the show that I've decided is going to be called Standing Up for Social and Economic Justice. And that says it all, basically, that it is time now that we stand up for our rights, as Bob Marley said. We're being trampled upon by the top 1%. Actually, the top 1/2 of 1% has captured almost all the new income that was generated in the last 5 years. In fact, 400-to-1 gaps are what exists today between the highest paid, the average CEO's income compared to the average worker's 400-to-1 today, when it was 40-to-1 just in 1980. Also, the top 400 families, the richest families in America, own the same amount of wealth today as 150 million Americans. That's half the country. Let me say that again. The richest 400 families in America have the same amount of wealth as half the country, 150 million Americans. And this is completely unacceptable in a democracy, because this kind of gap, this concentration of wealth and income in the hands of a few, resembles more of a feudal system, not a social democratic capitalist system, not a free market system, but a feudal system in which lords and kings, their children inherit the wealth and they pass it on, and serfs basically do all the work. And we don't want to get to that point, because America is too good a country. The promise of this country is too great. That is equal opportunity for all. We've been talking about all human beings being created equal in our declaration, and yet we should practice what we preach. So we are here to talk to some folks who are actually bearing the brunt of this situation. They will give you their personal stories, starting with a professor, a part-time college professor. We'll have her on in a few minutes. Her name is Catherine, and she teaches at our Riverside Community College as well as UC Irvine, and she'll be talking to you about her situation, as there are thousands of other part-time instructors who are really people with PhDs, and they should be teaching full-time, and yet they're getting half the income of what full-timers do, with generally quite inadequate or no health coverage whatsoever. We have, for example, Mayor Garcetti has been trying to push for a $13.25 per hour minimum wage for Los Angeles. I think that's a very important beginning, but that still won't get to what it really ought to be, and that is if we include all of the new productivity, all the productivity coming in from workers, where the economy has expanded and they've been producing more and more wealth, mainly for the owners. The worker productivity factored into minimum wage would place the wage today at $18.30 an hour. $18.30 is where it should be. Australia, minimum wage is $16 an hour. San Francisco, the city with the highest minimum wage for the last 10 years, has seen the highest growth in the country, economic growth, including small businesses growth. So the argument that quite often the right wing and others who don't care too much about American workers say that minimum wage will actually cause a loss in employment, that business will go out of business, it just doesn't hold up when it comes down to actually seeing what's happening. Because as workers have more money in their hands, as professionals have more money in their hands by getting paid a decent wage and salary, the consumer, those are the consumers, they will go out and buy more products and stimulate growth and actually make the economy hum by going out and giving money into the hands of those who earn it and not letting most of it go to the hands of the big corporate owners. We will be honoring the American tradition of rewarding hard work and also of creating an economy that will be vibrant, that will grow as it did between 1933 and 1979. During the Roosevelt era meaning that Franklin Roosevelt pushed the idea of hiring Americans directly to put money in their hands when they're unemployed, because he would not see children starving. He would not see workers just being degraded, like having to look for work for years and years. President Roosevelt said, as mainly the American people pushed him to say that. And I believe that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. So a lot of organizing and ferment in the progressive era, in the labor movement, pushed the president, pushed Congress into bringing these reforms of a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, anti-child labor laws. All those things started at the ground up. So it is really so important to look at our history in America. The most important changes and achievements in America, starting with the Civil War, which actually was culminated because abolitionists and mainly the African-American slaves who fought and who rose up at times and gave their lives for freedom and for equality, they pushed and they led the struggle for abolishing slavery. The people led and the leaders followed. The same thing with the civil rights movement. That happened the same way. The women's equality movement. So many of these movements, the LGBT equality movement, the movement for those with disabilities to have equal treatment and access to things, every one of these movements, the environmental movement started at the ground level. People got together. They said, we are the people. We're going to demand the society become fair and just like the paper, like the Constitution says, like the Declaration says on paper. We're going to put it into practice, and the leaders followed. So it is absolutely important that we remember that and know that our history is one of struggle, of achievement of the American people over and against the powerful elites who had to give up some of their privilege to provide opportunity for everyone else. And, you know, a couple of my students came down this morning after class, after we talked about some of these things, and they said to me, Professor Mathews, do you think it's really possible for us to really change our society and make it more socially just and more fair? After all, it seems like many people aren't even aware of these issues or what's really happening to them. After all, many people are dejected and feel depressed about what's going on. They don't really think they can make a difference by getting involved in political struggle or economic struggle. And I said to them, my friends, all we have to do is remember our history and act upon it. And those who know their history can control their destiny. And we can actually make the change, especially if you young people get together, get on the internet, get your Facebook accounts going, spread the word about the facts of inequality and injustice today and how we can fix those, and we will come up with solutions, and you will come up with solutions by talking to each other. So that's how we do it, and I think it's very important to note what President Lincoln once said. This is really very much relevant to today's downsizing of our economy, outsourcing of our work, and driving down the middle class and making it disappear, and making the poor even homeless and poorer. Let's go to President Lincoln's quote. President Lincoln said, "Labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor, and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital, and deserves much the higher consideration." Capital is only the fruit of labor, said Lincoln, and what he meant by that is that workers existed first. When we were hunter-gatherers, we all worked for a living. We all hunted the food, we gathered berries and fruit, and we all ate together. And it was communal, and there was no one class forcing the other class to go out and work hunting for them or bringing food to them like they do today. But everyone worked, everyone ate, everyone lived. So labor came first. Then with the advent of slavery and feudalism, capital was garnered from the workers. And slaves were forced to work for the conquering tribe that enslaved them, forced them to work in agriculture, and took out surplus capital from them, took up the surplus labor, rather, and made it into capital. The same thing with feudalism. The feudal lords forced the peasants to work, the landless laborers to work, and to pay 2/3 of their produce or more in rent, and the lords would live high off the hog, as with the top lord, the king. Those are the class societies. Capitalism is very similar. It certainly allows people to start at the bottom and go to the top if they can. It allows people to be born into a very moderate level station in life, but to climb the ladder through education, through your proclivity to work hard and to come up with new talent. Capitalism is a system that allows for more freedom than feudalism or slavery, but many of the elites today are trying to push us back, whether consciously or unconsciously, into a semi-slavery. I mean, it is just horrendous that the minimum wage has not gone up in so many years to keep up with inflation. If we just raise the minimum wage based on inflation since the 1970s, the inflationary increase, we would have the minimum wage today at least $15 an hour. And like I said earlier, if we include productivity of the workers, what they produced, the labor they produced, which the capitalists and big business have taken from them, if we raised that and shared some of those profits with the workers, as we should have done, it should be $18.30 an hour. So we will be talking about all these issues of fairness and justice and equity, and what is really ethical. This is also about ethics. It is certainly about treating your fellow human being the way you would like to be treated. It is absolutely important for us to live that way so we can really learn how to create a humane society with a life for everyone that would allow them to be, hardworking people, but also be creative. We need free time for our working people, and our 99% of us, to be able to spend time with our children and nurture them and go on vacations with them and have enough income so we're only working one job at 40 hours a week, preferably even less than that. Do you guys know out there in the audience that in Europe today, the maximum work week is 35 hours a week, not 40, with full pay. 35 hours a week with full pay. That's an extra hour a day to be with your children, to come home early, to cook some food, to enjoy it, and to go out and play or take them out to a baseball game. That kind of thing is so important to life, and it's not just about living like animals where you have to work to eat and to make a living, but instead live like human beings in the higher levels of life, in the superstructural element. The substructure is the economy. We all have to work, we have to produce, and those of us who do work produce most of the wealth and food and the income, whereas those who don't work, those living off their investment incomes, primarily get rich from getting others to work hard for them. And they have the freedom. The top 1/2 of 1% has the freedom to travel the world, enjoy life, go to the art museums, and have a lot of time with their children. But the bottom 99.5% of America today is struggling, and that has to change. And I hope that this radio show will actually help everyone and people to come together, because many of you know this is happening to you, but we'll provide some statistics and some facts and figures to show you that there's real evidence that American democracy is being dismantled as the middle class is being dismantled. And I do have a book out that's written and published recently called Dollar Democracy, with Liberty and Justice for Some, How to Reclaim the American Dream for All. And this book also delves into what we've just been talking about. It also looks into the idea that, actually the reality, that those with the money are the ones who are getting main policies, including tax breaks and loopholes made for them by members of Congress, whom they help to get elected with their huge campaign funds. And in return, the members of Congress of both parties, quite often, Democrats and Republicans, who are bought and paid for in many cases, most cases, by these corporate elites, these members of Congress vote for corporate loopholes for companies like Facebook, like Apple, like oil companies like Occidental Petroleum. These are the companies. Occidental Petroleum paid zero income tax in 2012 while receiving millions in corporate subsidies and had a negative tax burden. Facebook had the same loopholes made for them by members of Congress, where they paid zero income tax while making over $1 billion in profit last year, in 2012, for that tax year. And Facebook got a subsidy of $426 million from the taxpayer through the government to promote themselves around the world. So Facebook had a negative 40% tax burden. How do you like that? Would you guys like to have money coming back to you from the government? I certainly think a lot of us would say that would help us, even if it's a small amount. And the company of Apple Incorporated, Apple stashed $15 billion because of a legal tax loophole called the offshoring loophole in low tax haven countries like Ireland, and they avoided $15 billion in taxes last year. When there are children today with schools, 2/3 of our schools are inadequate in terms of class sizes being overcrowded, in terms of science and computer labs being shut down, in terms of, in some parts of our country, not enough textbooks to go around, basic textbooks for all the students in the class. Those things are happening today in our schools, while Apple and Facebook pay no income taxes, and the oil companies also have a big loophole here in California called the oil severance tax loophole. Do you know that a 15% severance tax on oil drilled from our ground in California would bring $4 billion for kindergarten through university and would make a big difference? Community colleges have been cut back by $1 billion in the last several years. From a $3 billion budget, they've been cut back almost $1 billion, almost 1/3. And you can imagine what that does to graduation rates, because students can't get the sections they need, have to wait in line to get in the nursing program, for example. And that is unacceptable when these corporations are paying no taxes. So we have to bring back justice by bringing about tax justice, by bringing about environmental justice, educational justice, food justice. These huge corporations are actually, like Monsanto, are putting out chemicals in our food through pesticides, glyphosate in Roundup-ready pesticide, which is creating weeds that are resistant, and there are even more weeds coming in, and these crops are becoming resistant because the weeds are being killed by the pesticide, but they're also growing weeds that are resistant again, and you have those chemicals going into our food and our water, not to mention genetically modified foods, GMOs, which corporations like Monsanto are pushing throughout the world, which are very bad for our digestion. You could go to the IRT, the Institute for Responsible Technology, IRT.org, headed by Jeffrey Smith, who's written a great book on GMOs, Seeds of Deception, showing how the research that's independent research, not corporate-funded research, proves that GMOs are the very best problematic for our stomachs, our digestive systems, our immune systems, but the big corporate agriculture keeps pushing them, and we've got people like Michael Taylor as an assistant director of veterinary as well as food in the FDA. Michael Taylor, a lobbyist, a vice president of Monsanto, has been appointed by President Obama to head the FDA's department, those departments dealing with food and veterinary. This is not acceptable. So we have all kinds of issues we'll talk about here and how we can bring back liberty and justice for all by implementing a 28th Amendment of the Constitution, which will be an amendment that would remove corporate personhood and also declare that money is not speech. And we'll talk about that in detail as we go along here a little later. But we should probably try to bring on our guest, our first guest, and then we'll talk a little bit more about these issues, and then we'll have the lines open up by, say, about 3:30 to bring the public in. So please, stay tuned here to KPFK and pick up your phones and call us in about 15, 20 minutes. Let's see, do we, D'Angelo, can we try to get, I think Catherine is ready to speak, so is she on the line?
Yes.
Hello, Catherine, how are you?
Hi, Peter. I'm good, thank you.
Welcome to KPFK, and it's good to have you here. And we'll start off with you telling us a bit about yourself and what you do, Catherine.
Okay, well, I teach at Moreno Valley Community College as an instructor in the English department. Mm-hmm. And I graduated with my PhD from UCR's English department in about 2008. And then I was awarded a one-year contract at UCR, teaching contract, which was good because it means I meant healthcare for a year, and which was better than being hired piecemeal, quarter by quarter,
mm-hmm.
Because you get the benefits. And so the year that I graduate, I'm teaching on the one-year contract at UCR, and I go on the market with a PhD, a dissertation very relevant to our times.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was the dissertation about?
Yeah.
Do you mind telling us a little bit about dissertation?
Yeah, it was about African-American men's fictional representations of failed encounters with white women, which are exploring the way that was symbolic for the progression of race relations at the cusp of civil war,
mm-hmm.
Or the cusp of civil rights. So that was, and so it was at the same time coinciding with Obama facing, the presidency with Hillary Clinton. And so, I mean, it was relevant to the time. I had 10 years teaching experience, a teaching award, and then, I was very active in my field on the conference circuit, and I was reading for journals, writing reviews for journals, and having my scholarly work.
So, Catherine, let me just interrupt you 1 second and say that it seems to me what you're saying so far about what you've done is tremendous accomplishment in your field. No one can fault you in any way for being inadequately prepared academically, but you've done so much that proves that you can do the job teaching a great full load of English classes in that field. Am I right? I mean, I would say so. That's my observation. But continue, please, and tell us a bit about your current situation and also how it affects your personal life.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I was teaching at UCR full-time, and then I was teaching 2/3 time at a community college. It was about 17 classes a year compared to like a full-timer at my community college teaches 6 classes a year. So it's very difficult. It's almost 2/3, or it's almost, 3 times. It's almost 3 times what a faculty member is teaching. But it's, one third, or like almost not quite 1/3, about half the pay.
Yes, I just have this down in my notes. It's about 50% pay that part-time instructors get at the community college compared to full-time instructors. And usually, quite often without health care either, or inadequate health coverage.
No health care, and that was a big problem. So I'm teaching one full-time job and then a 2/3 load, and Lehman falls. And we're called in at UCR. The 10 of us who are on one-year contracts are called in, and we're told there's 10 of you this year, and there will not be 10 of you next year. So I go find a third job. And so for a while I'm teaching a third job at a school that pays half the wage I'm making elsewhere, and is a 2-hour commute. And then UCR is not laying me off yet. So ultimately there's teaching conflicts. I can't handle 3 classes. There's not that many hours in the day.
Yes.
That the schedule, that the classes don't conflict with one another. So I have to quit the third job to keep the job that offers me intermittent health care. And then, of course, I'm laid off at UCR.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, I'm on the job market, and I've been on the job market for 3, 4, 5 years. I'm getting multiple interviews at the same schools. So at some point, I'm laid off of UCR. I'm late, and then we get a new chair at my community college, and I'm like, I don't get a summer class.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on unemployment. I'm interviewing at Santa Monica with the president, and I have all these other job interviews, and I realize, like, this is my third time being interviewed at Santa Monica, third time interviewed at Marina Valley College, and, you know.
You mean interviewed for a full-time job, you're saying?
Right, interviewed for full-time jobs, and I'm thinking, okay, this is, at some point, you know, I need to stop, I need to go off the market, and I need to think about how to do this, because I don't want to close doors. I don't want them to go, oh, this is a woman that we interviewed 4 times already.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I don't want these doors to close. So I'm teaching at Marina Valley College, and I go off the market for a little while just to plan, you know, like, what should I be, you know, should I continue being on the job market full time?
Yes. And one more thing, Catherine, aren't there between 150 to 400 interviewees quite often with these full-time positions? It's in the hundreds range of people applying for the same one job.
It's absolutely not right. There's 400 applicants, and one person is going to be hired.
Yes.
And,
look at those odds.
And meanwhile, so like the summer that I'm on unemployment because I didn't get a class, and it's the first time that's happened to me. But that's what we mean, you know, when we're terrified by this lack of job security.
Yes.
Like all of a sudden, one term you're laid off, and I'm paying $1,000 a month on my $60,000 student loan that I've accrued over the course of 14 years in higher education.
Yes.
So I'm paying $1,000 a month, and then I can't anymore because I'm not working a job and 66% load anymore. So my loans, I get them deferred, and then the deferral runs out, and then after so many months, and I'm still working part-time.
And one more thing, Catherine, when you have a deferral on a student loan, the interest rate still accrues, am I right?
Right, absolutely.
And so your loan amount that you have to pay back even goes up even further as you're deferring the loan for a little while. So that doesn't help a lot at all. Yeah.
In my case, I lose contact with my student loans. Part of it I think was a move, but another part of it was just me living in fear. It's like I can't pay any money because I'm not even paycheck to paycheck with my part-time job. But so my loans become delinquent, and that amounts to a $16,000 fee, and once these people finally get a hold of you, and it also cost me my federal tax return, which was withheld or given to the
right. So you seem to be you and many other instructors in the part-time situation have tremendous amount of instability economically, and it creates a lot of problems in your personal life. Would you mind telling us a bit about some of your personal life situations that are affected by this situation of lack of employment as well as low-level pay, lack of health coverage, lack of stability in employment, which makes a big difference? Tell us a bit about how that affected your personal life, family, perhaps.
It's very difficult because when I was working 80-hour weeks, my daughter wrote me a note while I was working on a conference paper for a panel called Part-Time Live, and my daughter wrote me a note and flipped it to me that said, "Mommy, will you please spend time with me?"
Wow.
And in addition to the $76,000 I now owe on the student loans, from which I borrowed $60,000.
Yes.
I have, dental bills because
medical bills. You said medical bills. Yeah, go ahead.
Dental bills for me and my daughter.
Dental bills. Yeah.
When my daughter was getting she was at the orthodontist, and we had this. There was $3,000 worth of work she was going to do, and this started when I was employed with UCR, and so my half was going to be $1,500 or whatever. So I paid my half, but then I was that ran out, or my health insurance ran out by the time, or before they had a chance to pay their $1,500.
Look at that. So this is another healthcare crisis problem affecting you personally. And if we had a universal single-payer healthcare system, like Medicare for all, like they have in Canada and like we have for elderly people here, you would never have to worry about that, whether you're working or not. Am I right?
Yeah, and they would be, less reluctant to hire people full time.
That's another point. Yes, it's affecting the hiring of full-time workers because the employer says, we don't want to pay health care. It'll save us money if we keep these full-time workers part-time, and if we keep the part-time workers below a certain level of work. And that also cuts back your hours of teaching or working somewhere else, in other professions as well. And this is a complete... That's why I support a single-payer healthcare system. Of course, President Obama went the other route, an employer-mandated system that kept the private system in place and worked with the health insurance companies and the lobbyists. And then he gave them what they wanted. He couldn't get the public option. But let's not get off your subject, and we need to wrap this up in a couple of minutes because I do have to open up the lines to the public and talk about a couple of things. But tell us any other area that you find you'd like to share with us.
Well, it affects my living in poverty affects my whole life,
Yes.
Like, so right now it's like there's going to be a day of reckoning where I have to take on another job, when I can find one, and it's going to mean that I'm not there for my daughter, but it's also going to mean that the money that I make at a second job is going to go to health insurers, so health insurance companies, which I'm never, I'm never going to be able to, even if I could make the monthly payment, I'm never going to be able to pay the initial fee that you have to pay to use the health care. It's going to go to gas. I already spend $400 a month on gas commuting to my job.
Commuting from your home to several different teaching jobs.
Right, and
$400 a month on gas.
$300 payment and car insurance, so $700 a month on my car. But and then it's going to go to student loans. So I know that taking a second job is just going to be paying to gas and health insurers, and at the cost of me spending time with my daughter.
Your daughter, that's the worst part of it. And Catherine, I want to really thank you for sharing this with us, the macroeconomic effects, but also the micro, the family effects of your personal situation, given the condition of part-time professors and also part-time other workers in America who've been outsourced and downsized and basically put aside because they're looked at as a commodity. There are so many of my students who need classes, need sections to take so they can graduate on time, and we could hire people like you as a full-time professor, hire other part-timers as full-time professors, but it's going to cost more money, isn't it? And here's what the government ought to be doing. This government seems to be able to find money to spend the most amount on defense and on weapons and on wars around the world. Quite often they are not even necessary in any way a just war or needed war. And they go into Iraq, for example, and create a whole mess that we're now having a boomerang from because George Bush and others believe that we have to stabilize Iraq in our own way and also get some way to get to the oil. That's a problem, Catherine. And here are Americans like you suffering. And we have to let the public know about this so people will get together and basically rise up peacefully and demand from members of Congress and the presidential candidates as well and other people running for office that they have to serve America first and Americans first and serve the global community in the right way. We as Americans don't have to be the policemen of the world. We need to actually have a soft power foreign policy that would actually create systems that would help the world. Don't you think, Catherine? We could export hospital systems like they do from Denmark to other parts of the world. We could do like China and help build railroads in countries and health programs and educational literacy programs, and that would help us have good friendship, less threatening, and our foreign policy has to be changed also in the Middle East, which means an equitable, fair policy. So, Catherine, I don't want to go into foreign policy from your own personal situation, but I want to thank you for helping us talk a bit about this and make it more human and show a human face to it. So thank you so much, and we'll have you back some other time, okay?
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Catherine. And that was Catherine, a professor of English, part-time professor at Riverside Community College and UC Irvine, who quite often cannot make ends meet because of the part-time instructor situation. By the way, 2/3 of community college instructors are part-time, and only 1/3 are full-time. And the income gap is there so that you could the district can hire several part-timers rather than one full-timer, so they can cover more classes. But what does that do to the quality of life for the instructor, the professor, as well as the students? So that's very important. And that's a microcosm and sort of a model for the rest of American economy and society. So I would like to say a couple more things about this standing up for social and economic justice, and then we can move on to opening up the lines for the public to go ahead and call in and give us your ideas on this and tell us your personal situations as to how you've been affected by injustice in so many areas. This is still, I think, in my view, a very great country. America's Declaration of Independence and Constitution talked about, especially the Declaration talked about the unalienable rights, the rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Those are real, meaningful words, but that has to be practiced, and we have to guarantee, the government has to guarantee those rights. Or, as John Locke and Thomas Jefferson said, the government has to be replaced. And I, of course, would advocate peaceful replacement of the government. I believe in peaceful, nonviolent change, and we have done that before. But it's time that we really get together, inform ourselves, and get together with young people particularly to help them have a better life. This will be the first generation, ladies and gentlemen, if it keeps going like it is, the first generation to do worse than their parents, economically and socially. And to me, that's a social sin. That has to be changed, and we can do much better in this country. Take some of that money from the defense budget, put it into people's programs here at home, and also a humane foreign policy, which includes humane foreign aid that helps build economies and helps literacy programs and gets people on their feet in other parts of the world, and that will make us a lot more friends in the world. We spend now on defense the same amount of money as the next 10 countries put together. We spend 7 to 8 times as much as China, which is number 2, and it's just, to me, completely unnecessary. In fact, you look at some of the equipment that we're buying, like the C-17 airplane, that President Obama said we don't need. We have hundreds of them, at least 100 of them or more, in the Air Force, and that was enough for the Cold War era when it was built for the possible Soviet, ground invasion, which never occurred. But it was built for that, and we don't need any more, said the President. And yet members of Congress, bought by the defense contractors, the military-industrial complex lobbyists, who gave them campaign contributions and lobbied them, these members of Congress voted for $2.6 billion to buy more C-17 airplanes that we don't need. And this is the kind of military-industrial complex waste that President Eisenhower warned us against back in the 1950s. The inordinate appetite of the military-industrial complex. There's a lot to be done. Corporate loopholes to be closed, shifting defense money to civilian purposes, making sure every one of our American people have a chance in life to develop fully their full human potential and their pursuit of happiness. So I would like to now, with the help of our engineer, open up the lines, please, to the public. Please call in and let us know what you'd like to discuss and talk about. Thank you. Okay, do we have someone on the line yet? Is anyone there on the line calling in, or will you be calling in soon, hopefully? Let's see, Matt.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Matt, I can hear you clearly. Thank you so much for calling in.
Great. Thank you for the important show, and thank God for Pacifica and KPFK.
Yes.
A couple things real quick, because I'm sure lots of people are going to call in. I think what we need to recognize and fully embrace in our solidarity is that we don't have a democracy. We have proto-fascism. Mussolini himself said the definition of fascism is when corporations and the government intertwine, and Mr. Eric Cantor proves exactly. I mean, he is the
poster child.
Pardon?
He's the poster boy for that.
Well, yeah, and Ronald Reagan, although he was just a tool, but Reaganomics was the ambassador of proto-fascism. We see things like the Powell Amendment going into place, and ultimately what we need to do, the system must be changed peacefully. A few things. We have to get corporate money out of politics. That's
yes,
the only
that's
way.
Number one.
Clean campaigns. I'm going to start this campaign. I invite people to go to my website, mattprine.com. You can scroll down to see an image that it's a corporate devil holding two puppets. One's a donkey, one's an elephant. I'm going to start this campaign called See You in November, and it's about ending corporate bribes.
That is excellent, Matt. Great plan. We'll get more people involved in that campaign, and they can go to your website as well. You've already given it out, right?
Yes, and another thing, too, is the monetary system. We need a system that works for the people, not enslaves them. Many people don't understand the nature of money, that banks put up 10% of the face value of a loan due to fractional reserve, and therefore they make 900% return on every loan before. Now, North Dakota, which is really screwed up state.
The State Bank of North Dakota. Go right ahead.
Yes, the state bank. If we had state banks in every state, plus we had municipal banks.
Yes.
Like a car that generates its own fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that lots of times people are observing the water that's flowing out of the dam and figuring out how to get the most absorbent mop. We need to look at
good analogy.
And that's one of them right there. And with solidarity, yes, people on the left and right fight, but we can all agree on one thing, that we need a system that works for us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that valuable input, Matt. Appreciate it, and you're absolutely right on in my view on everything you said. Is there another caller on the line yet? I think there is. and that is Alvaro. Is that right? I'm sorry. Johan? Is Johan there from Santa Monica?
Yes.
Oh.
I have a few points. I like his idea, but I'd also like to go back to where the post office was able to act as a bank. I think they're already set up for it, and I think we should support the post office. But what I'd like to mention is this money for minimum wage. I have three things to point out.
Yes.
It would be coming from bonuses. Is that so much to ask, like the Walmart people, when they're making billions and billions of dollars in sheer profit every year? It's not like the money should be coming from anywhere else, but from out of their profits. For
Absolutely.
This money. And I want to emphasize that because I think people don't understand where the money should be coming from. It would be cutting into their profit margin. The other thing is I'd like to ask you about what kind of health care does Congress and the Senate have? Because that's all I'm asking for.
Yes.
And then
government funded fully. Government-funded health care, Congress and even the state legislature, or at least in some states. But the Congress has government-funded health care. You're absolutely right.
Right. So that's universal single health care, and we pay for that. We subsidize that. We pay their
We taxpayers pay it, yes.
Yes. The other thing is I find appalling why we've got to all get together, by the way. It just can't be someone like me and the previous callers calling in, because I'm tired of talking about this. I'm thoroughly versed in social policy. I've been since I was a child, and it's just time for action. I just can't take any more of this inequality. I ended up homeless myself. I was married to a 1%er who was very close to George Bush, okay? And he's now in gas and oil, and I literally ended up living in a car with children, and I was the first wife, and those were the first children.
Wow, how sad,
okay?
Yes.
So I know what I'm talking about, and I grew up with presidents at my dinner table, and I was completely defrauded. But something else that I think is very important here is this thing about the student loans, that is the only thing that cannot be wiped out as a debt in bankruptcy. It was stipulated by when George Bush changed the bankruptcy laws during his regime.
That's right. It's the only type of loan that cannot be gotten out of through bankruptcy.
And it is breaking. It is putting these kids into such turmoil and stress.
Oh, it is horrible, Joanna. In fact, 40 million students in America who have graduated with a bachelor's degree have student debt. And the average student debt is $30,000 at this point, but it's also growing in numbers. And the total student debt is $1.2 trillion, which could be the next bubble, but more importantly, it's just killing our children's financial future. To come out with debt of $70,000, and if you go to medical school, forget it. Yeah.
They can't get out from underneath it.
They can't get out. It's all their lives they'll be paying for it.
It's ticking.
So we need to support, there are a few Democrats who are progressive somewhat, like Elizabeth Warren. She's talking about, working on something regarding student debt.
Home state.
Yeah, is she? From Massachusetts, right. So
I just love her.
Yeah, she's a wonderful person, and her policies are quite spot on. And I would like to see more people like that in office, but they're not there because of the corporate money buying most of the elections and most of the candidates. So we've got to work, and I'm with you all the way, Joanna. We've got to come together on this, and we could start with, you could go to movetoamend.org, actually. That's an organization, Move to Amend Coalition, that has already a constitutional amendment proposed and written that would remove corporate personhood and declare that money is not speech. And the Move to Amend Coalition has hundreds of organizations and about 400,000 petitioners who've signed petitions to get their members of Congress to co-sponsor it. And it has already been introduced in the House, and there are about 80 co-sponsors. But this amendment would really do a lot of help in evening out the playing field.
Can I suggest we have got to show up when these congressmen come home for their so-called gadabouts at libraries.
Yes.
Show up and ask very pointed questions. I always stand up and I go, I really would like health care just like yours. Or I say something about, I understand you didn't vote, or you voted in and went along with this tuition deal so that kids are held accountable and they can't get out from under. I really think that that's necessary.
That is very important, Joanna. I'm going to have to let you go so other people call. Several calls are waiting, but I think this is really great what you've told us. And you're absolutely right about the student debt issue as well, and we'll continue with fighting for justice in this regard. You could show up at these congressional town halls or when they're meeting the voters this fall before the election. Ask them, where did your campaign money come from, Mr. or Miss Member of Congress? Where did you get your $1.7 million, which that's the average amount they raise and spend every 2 years? And then you can also tell them, if they don't want to tell you, show them the list that you have that you've already downloaded and printed from opensecrets.org. Go to that website, opensecrets.org. It's put on by the Center for Public Integrity, a nonprofit. It's very accurate, based on the Federal Election Commission information. And that OpenSecrets.org also tells you how these members of Congress voted and was it correlated with the industries that gave them the money. So you can not only embarrass them, you can tell the rest of the audience the truth about who's giving them the money, follow the money. That's a good website. Also, maplight.org for the state level contributions, maplight.org, and followthemoney.org. Those are all great websites, and you can ask these members of Congress and state legislators who are running for re-election, what is the truth? And here's what we want. Are you willing to do this for us, or are your hands tied by the corporate donors? I think this is great. Let's move on to the next caller, please. And that will be Oliver from... I'm sorry, it's Alvaro? Is Alvaro?
Yes.
Okay, yes, Alvaro. Please go ahead and speak up. Thank you for calling.
The electoral process was broken long before United Citizens.
Citizens United.
It was already broken before then.
Yes.
Number two, Karl Marx predicted monopoly capitalism.
That's right.
And George Orwell was very specific about why the situation is the way it is in America and a large part of the world. It's because the rulers have to keep us in a condition where we have to worry more about food and putting a roof over our heads than
organizing or making demands on them.
Exactly.
You're right. You've hit the nail on the head, but we can break out of that. We've done it in the past, and it has to be done, Alvaro. So anything else, sir, before we move on? Yes.
It's not going to be done by debating the Democrats and the Republicans.
No, we can't just stick to that. We have a much broader agenda to push progressive change and progressive politics.
No, I think it's more revolutionary change, not progressive.
Well, it could be revolution, but it has to be, to me, in my view, a nonviolent, peaceful revolution, because that's the only kind that will ever work here, and also I think it's more moral. And let's leave it at that, and let's move on to the next caller. Thank you, Alvaro, for those ideas. I think the next caller is Oscar, please. I think Oscar's on the line, and from Torrance.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Oscar. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm really disillusioned with the Democrats, and especially Elizabeth Warren, for supporting the bombing of Gaza, the bombing of hospitals, the bombing of the United Nations schools. She is a sellout. She completely sold out to the Zionists in Israel. And now, I supported her. Now I really have no hopes with Democrats. I'm really upset about this. We need a third party. And this is what we need to build on, a third party to get rid of the Republicans and the Democrats.
Okay, very well put, and it certainly has a good ring to it. Like to me, that may be the way to go, is a third party. But right now, we've got to work with what we got and start working toward grassroots organizing for a third party or social movement. You're absolutely right. Let's move on to the next caller, please. That will be Chuck from Burbank, right? Chuck?
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you so much.
Very quick. I have a high school education, but I feel I have a PhD just by listening to KPFK over
Absolutely.
the years.
Go right ahead.
Listen, you don't have to be an Einstein to understand what's wrong with our economy and the United States. Number one, we have a corporatocracy as opposed to a democracy. All these industrial these industrial complexes that have sprung up because of, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Essentially, I think that's what we're dealing with. And my views mirror the earlier callers, or there's a lot of disillusionment. I mean, if the corporatocracies dictate the Congress and the Senate actions, is there any hope? I think there's got to be something significant that comes about to turn the
tide.
Yes, sir. But that's all I wanted to say.
Well, I appreciate that, Chuck, and you've hit on a very important point, and that is disillusionment. I mean, over 2/3 of Americans say the country is going in the wrong direction. And furthermore, how many million didn't vote last time in 2012? 90 million eligible voters stayed home because of lack of hope and disillusionment. In 2010, 120 million voters. That's over 60%, 65% stayed home. And it's already, they're predicting lower turnout here, and that's because of this disillusionment, as you pointed out.
And ultimately, I think it's by design. There's a design by those that can dictate it.
Good point.
And
Good point. We got to do something about it, and we'll keep going. I got to talk to a couple more people, though. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Take care. Bob in Studio City, please. Bob.
Yes, I hope you give me a couple minutes to talk about something that nobody understands. Right now, the superintendent of LAUSD, and this is the largest city in which the superintendent is totally in control. New York is controlled by the mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I hear you very clear.
Okay.
Go ahead.
John Deasy with Santa Monica Malibu School District as superintendent, and from 2001 to 2004, he awarded $100,000 per year to a man named Robert Fellner at the University of Providence and the University of Louisville. He received a doctorate from this man, so he is Dr. John Deasy. He gave this man and his Front Foundation $375,000 of California, Santa Monica, and he was later in 2008 investigated for, and in 2010 went to jail for 5 years. John Deasy's doctorate was bought by Santa Monica Malibu. Los Angeles Unified School District was bought for $60 million that John Deasy, while working for Bill Gates, gave to 5 private charter school companies, 5 which are traded publicly on the market. This is the most corrupt education system. He is finally being caught. He bought his degree, and he bought the superintendent's job with Bill Gates' money. Bill Gates, who is writing all the programs of teacher evaluation, Common Core, this city has been taken over. All the people elected to the school board were elected by money given by Bloomberg, Gates, and the Waltons, so they could get rid of the unions and award this school district to a thief. This needs to be looked up. John Deasy doctorate. Anybody who wants to research, you will find that there's been articles about him in the New York Times, Washington Post. It is no secret thing how we got to be superintendent because we have the most corrupt school system. He's now sold $1 billion, and he's in trouble. It's time to pile on.
Well, thank you very much for that information, and I've read a lot of that myself. Not all of it, but I don't have all the evidence for what you said, but we will certainly look into it. I know a lot of it's out in the papers. Like you said, the LA Times has carried some of this, New York Times and Washington Post, and he is being investigated, that's for sure. Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate that, Bob from Studio City. And now we go to Eric in Bellflower. Eric, are you there, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clear. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. I love the quote you started with by Lincoln.
Yes.
It reminded me of another quote that I heard by John Steinbeck.
Okay.
Where he says that socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as exploited working class, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. And I think this is key because the people that know become so frustrated with the people that don't know, and people that don't believe that change needs to occur. I mean, you can say America is divided between people that believe there's revolution is needed and other people that think that America is perfect, you know?
Right, and certainly there may be a third point of view on that too, and you're right. What Steinbeck was right on the dot, I think, and it does connect with Lincoln's quote. So, is there anything else you'd like to add to that? But thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's people are calling for a third party. I voted for Roseanne, honestly, because I knew
Roseanne Barr.
Yeah, last election,
right?
Because she makes more sense than what the guys, the Republicans and Democrats are saying. Because we know that they're the same party. They're for the 1%.
It's quite often been called a duopoly of two parties like that have been corporate.
Occupy is analogous with the 99%. You know, it's all about changing this economic system to more socialist capitalism. You know, that's all it needs to occur, and we just need to remove those politicians that don't agree and vote in the right ones. You know.
Absolutely, that is absolutely true, and there is a name for that called social.
To go into the streets. They want us to go into the streets and protest. They've militarized the police, and they're ready. They're ready. They learned from the civil rights. They learned to take control of the media. They learned to take control of the police. And people are walking into a trap, I think, by getting violent in the streets.
And I absolutely believe that we should not have violence, that we should get together in a way to protest peacefully.
Boycott.
We could go out there and organize, educate, agitate, and make demands and vote as well and get our own people elected, those for the working people. And believe me, I think that it's time that we will do this because it's getting, and I just hope we go in the right direction, because sometimes when people get desperate and hopeless, they can go off in all kinds of directions. Am I right?
Nonviolent resistance.
That's what we've been. Nonviolent resistance that we've proven to have worked before, and it's time now to take that.
It worked for the Haitian slaves, and it worked for the civil rights, and it'll work for the future.
That's right. It also worked in India against the British, at least in getting the British out of India, to leave as rulers and stay as friends. So there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. Thank you so much, Eric, for that. And is there any other caller? Yes, there is. Dustin from Whittier. Yes, Dustin, please speak up. How are you?
Hi. Hi. So remember, one thing you mentioned earlier was the how the government was wasting money on our military.
Yes.
So me as a veteran, I used to work in logistics, so I saw this all the time.
You saw it firsthand, you're saying?
Yes. I was in the service for 7 years, so I seen it all, like everywhere I went. One thing we do though is like we order a lot of stuff, but usually it's because for one thing we usually order like a lot of equipment, like engine parts and whatnot, just in case our equipment breaks down, which is good. But sometimes we overdo it by get all these engine parts that be sitting in our warehouses for the longest time, and we end up having to ship them out to get repaired again. Another with money. Another thing too is all these tanks, planes that we are being, we personally do not, that we in the military do not need anymore because we already have enough vehicles to move us around. But it was but Congress is telling us to that we have to take it.
There you go. They're forcing it on the military, saying take this equipment. And a lot of these members of Congress, they have these defense contractors in their district with factories that are producing one airplane on the parts that are, the airplane produced all over the United States in different factories in the different districts. And then the Congress members want to jump on board and say, you got to vote for this. And they vote for it. So you're saying some of this equipment is unnecessary. Some of it's overkill. Some of it is actually inadequate equipment that doesn't work very well. We also know about cost-plus contracting. Defense contracting works with cost-plus agreements where the government, when a particular helicopter is contracted for by a corporation to be built, maybe 100 of them for some amount of money per helicopter, and if that helicopter, if the steel for that helicopter is not readily available, the corporation can say, you know what, there was a delay in our steel shipment from South Korea, so it's going to take 6 more months to get it to you, Congress, to get the helicopter to you delivered, and it's going to cost a lot more because there was an increase in the price of steel. They can just basically come up with all kinds of cost overruns, and the contracting has that little thing in tiny little print saying cost plus overruns in the contract. So then the helicopter that may have been contracted for, say, $6 million ends up being $13 million. Am I right? That's documented, by the way, in a book by Norman Cousins, The Pathology of Power, a UCLA professor. It's also in other documentation that this kind of wasteful defense spending, and you're saying that, Dustin, you've actually seen some of the results of this yourself.
Well, yes. I mean, we have a lot of vehicles, and some of the vehicles, we have mechanics that we can. If a Humvee breaks down, they can fix it. If there's one of a Bradley tank breaks down, they can fix it. But some of these new vehicles, like the MRAPs, those are specifically have to be repaired by the contractors. We don't have the tools to repair them. So it's another waste right there.
So you bring in these expensive defense contractors to come in with privatized companies to repair them, and it costs a lot more money than if you train and provide the tools for the actual military men and women themselves to do it. I've got to run, Dustin. We're out of time here. We've got two more people, but I think we're going to have to wait for the next time we're on to have the other folks on because we've only got about 3 more minutes left here. But perhaps we can get Noah's call here for about 30 seconds, Noah, please, if you don't mind, or 45 seconds. Are you still there, Noah?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Mathews?
Yes. Peter Mathews.
If you do not remember me, I'm actually a student in your class.
Oh, you're one of my students from Cypress College. Okay. Make it quick, Noah. We got only a few seconds left, please.
I'm like a couple of callers ahead. One that said that
I'm sorry, Noah, you're breaking up. We're going to have to cut it off, but you're really breaking up with your cell phone, and we can't really understand you. So let's wait till the next time, and we only have a couple of minutes to wrap up here. We're going to have Oliver from Torrance come back another time we're on. Okay, thank you. Let me continue a bit here to wrap this up. And don't forget Lawyers Guild and Jim Rafferty will be back next week. I just want to mention that the book I've written, which is relevant to this topic of money and politics and the inequity and injustice in our society as a result, is called Dollar Democracy with Liberty and Justice for Some, How to Reclaim the American Dream for All. And you can go to my website, epetermathews.com. It's spelled Matthews with one T, M-A-T-H-E-W-S, epetermathews.com, and order the book there, or you can go to Amazon or to Barnes & Noble, or preferably your small neighborhood bookstore, which is also carrying it. But other than that, I think it's a tremendous work that KPFK is doing to educate the public. Please, folks, always support KPFK when you have a chance to do so, and certainly tune in here and give them your moral and eventually financial support as well. Thank you so much. I think we're almost out of time here. We may have about another minute or so. One more minute. Okay. Just want to mention my 2.5-year-old daughter, Paige Mathews. I look at her beautiful eyes, and I look in there and I see, what are we offering the children of her generation if we keep going this way? It is a very dangerous and disastrous situation with global warming, with the gap between rich and poor, with her tuitions not even being able to, we couldn't even afford to pay her college tuitions the way they're going right now when she's 18 years old. So with the love that we have for our children and our families and our friends, we've got to come together, folks, and fight for social justice. Just as Bob Marley said, get up for your rights, and let's come together for change. Thank you so much. We'll see you later. Peter Mathews.